Hello and welcome to my channel, Vice Rhino here. This is my first installment in a series where I go through the new Answers book series. I'm not necessarily going to be going through the chapters in order, but I do plan on addressing all of the major claims made in the book, though there are a few chapters that I'm definitely just not even going to touch on. Like, they have a chapter on who Cain's wife was, and after 6 pages of trying to frame it in a favorable light to them, they come right out and say that she was either his sister or his niece, but most likely was his sister. And then they spend the rest of the chapter explaining why incest was okay in that one instance, despite being explicitly forbidden by God's perfect, unchanging law. And as I do when I read things like this for myself, I have applied some effects to my voice so that you can tell audibly whether it's me talking or AIG. So on to Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. Don't creationists deny the laws of nature?
I mean, just as a quick answer to nothing but the title, yes. After all, it's the creationists publishing papers that explicitly state that God messed with the laws of physics. There's a reason creationists have to make their own research journals. Reputable journals tend not to publish papers whose conclusions are, our results contradicted our initial hypothesis, so rather than accept these results, we posit that the laws of physics change without leaving any evidence of such a change behind, in just such a way as to make our hypothesis appear slightly less improbable.
The laws of nature are perfectly consistent with biblical creation and pose a serious problem for naturalism.
Yep, it's always those pesky methodological naturalists suggesting that the laws of nature must have changed in the past in order to accommodate their pre-drawn conclusions.
The Word of God. Everything in the universe, every plant and animal, every rock, every particle of matter or light wave is bound by laws, which it has no choice but to obey. The Bible tells us that there are laws of nature.
Does it? The book that describes God routinely breaking the laws of nature also explains that there are laws of nature that can't be broken?
Ordinances of heaven and earth, Jeremiah 33:25.
That's subject to interpretation. In context, he's basically saying, I'm going to keep this promise that I appear to be breaking at the moment, just as I made day and night and ordered the heavens. So it's not stating that there are laws of nature so much as crediting God with the creation of the day-night cycle.
These laws describe the way God normally accomplishes his will in the universe.
Notice how they snuck the word normally in there. That is a tacit admission that in order for their worldview to actually be correct, there have to have been several instances of the laws of nature being not just broken but completely shattered in order for God to accomplish what the book says he accomplished.
God's logic is built into the universe, and so the universe is not haphazard or arbitrary.
But is God not often arbitrary? There are a good many laws in the Old Testament that don't seem to serve any useful function, that are followed up with phrases like, I am the Lord, as their apparent justifications. No reason for it other than just because God said so. Sure, some of these laws have post hoc justifications applied to them. Improperly cooked shellfish and pork can cause food poisoning. But it seems like if this was actually why they were made illegal under God's dietary laws, he could explain that. I don't want you to eat these foods because they can make you sick, rather than, don't eat that because I said so and I'm God, motherfucker, so you better do as I say! If you really want arbitrary, read through Exodus 28 sometime. That's where it explains the garments that priests are supposed to wear. And aside from a bit of symbolism with the 12 gemstones representing the 12 tribes of Israel, it is completely arbitrary. Why does the priest need alternating pomegranates and golden bells on the hem of his robe? It never says. That's just God's fashion sense, I suppose.
The most fundamental laws of nature exist only because God wills them to.
The fundamental laws of nature are descriptive, not prescriptive. We use science to describe how the universe works, and there is no evidence to suggest that the universe needs something to force it to work that way.
The atheist is unable to account for the logical, orderly state of the universe.
The atheist does not need to account for it. I know that's not a satisfying answer, but the laws of nature are just our human way of describing how the universe works. We don't know if it's even possible for the universe to work in a different way. We don't know whether or not there are other universes that do work in a different way. There are really too many unknowns here for us to say anything about it with any certainty. And just because a creationist can boldly assert that they have the answer, does not mean that they actually do have the answer. As anyone who has kids will likely be able to tell you, children are often very confident to the point of belligerence about some fact that they are actually really wrong about. Many a sibling squabble are the result of one sibling just knowing for sure that the other one took their toy, much to their chagrin when they later find that toy in question lying exactly where they had placed it but forgotten about it. The amount of confidence one has in an idea has no bearing on how true that idea actually is.
Why should the universe obey laws if there is no lawgiver?
Why should the laws of the universe need a lawgiver? Why should the universe disobey the laws of nature if there is no lawgiver? These are not human laws which are put in place in an effort to affect behavior. They just describe how things are. There doesn't appear to be a need for a conscious force telling a rock that I drop to obey the laws of gravity. It just does. Adding a god into the mix is just an extra assumption that doesn't actually help us answer any questions.
But laws of nature are perfectly consistent with biblical creation.
Yeah, okay, buddy, sure. The laws of nature are perfectly consistent with a creation story that has God repeatedly breaking the laws of nature. You just go ahead and keep thinking that.
In fact, the Bible is the foundation for the natural laws.
Which would be astonishing if you could actually find the natural laws anywhere in the Bible, but you can't. The closest you get are vague statements about God having made day and night.
The law of life, biogenesis. There is one well-known law of life, the law of biogenesis. This law states simply that life always comes from life.
Okay, but that's not actually a scientific law. The only places I can see it being referred to as a law are either creationist websites or scientists from the 1800s putting too much credence in it and then running into opposition of it being considered a law by other scientists of the time.
Historically, Louis Pasteur disproved one form of spontaneous generation. He showed that life comes from previous life.
And in a stellar example of how creationist arguments seem to be immune to evolution themselves, the counter to this that I have used myself on occasion can be found in papers dating back to the 1870s. Pasteur's experiment on boiled broth demonstrated one thing and one thing only, that the spoilage of broth is not the result of spontaneous appearance of mold. It only demonstrates that modern living organisms won't just pop into existence out of nothing. This gets unreasonably extrapolated by creationists to include the beginning of the first organism that might have been called alive, without any justification. In fact, I have yet to hear a creationist accurately explain exactly what Pasteur's experiment was, because if you do that, it becomes rather obvious that boiling and then sealing off broth in no way demonstrates that life could not form spontaneously if given the right conditions and the right chemicals. It just proves that broth won't spoil if you isolate it from organisms that make it spoil. So, according to this paper in the 1870s, not a single biologist of name, no matter their philosophic tendencies, would assert biogenesis as a law in anything approaching the same confidence as the laws of gravitation. And on top of that, the author of this paper also points out that the person he is responding to was relying on out-of-context quote mines to make his position seem more sure than it actually was. So, creationist arguments have not evolved much, nor have their tactics.
Real science confirms the Bible.
Yeah, sure. If by real science, you mean grossly misrepresenting the findings of an experiment from over a century ago despite having been corrected on this misrepresentation for just as long as it has been made.
The laws of chemistry. Life requires a specific chemistry. Our bodies are powered by chemical reactions and depend on the laws of chemistry operating in a uniform fashion.
Yeah. Life is basically just a cascade of chemical reactions when you break it down, non-living molecules that work together to form life. If you look at it on a small scale, abiogenesis is happening inside your body all the time. Whatever you eat gets broken down into its constituent non-living parts. These non-living parts are then turned into living material through a series of chemical reactions. Yeah, these particular chemical reactions are facilitated by already living organisms, but it still, when broken down to its most basic, is non-living chemicals becoming life.
Every living being has information stored on a long molecule called DNA. Life as we know it would not be possible if the laws of chemistry were different.
Even as a creationist, you have to put caveats in there. Yeah, if the laws of chemistry were different, life as we know it may not be possible. Key phrase, as we know it. It may be entirely possible for life to exist with different laws of chemistry, and we just have no way of verifying that.
God created the laws of chemistry in just the right way so that life would be possible.
Ah, you forgot the caveat that time. Life as we know it. Like I said, and like you implied, it is possible that life as we don't know it would be possible under a different set of natural laws. The truth is that we don't have enough information to say either way.
The properties of elements and compounds are not arbitrary.
I don't know of anyone who says that they are.
In fact, the elements can be logically organized into a periodic table based on their physical properties.
So, is that the argument now? It is possible for us to organize things by physical properties, therefore God?
Substances in the same column on the table tend to have similar properties. This follows because elements in a vertical column have the same outer electron structure.
Sure, fine, but why is that a big deal? Like, how many electrons are in the outer shell determines some of the physical properties of the elements. So, when we organize a chart by how many electrons are in the outer shell, you'll find that the number of electrons in the outer shell appears to be organized on the chart. To borrow a phrase that the kids are all using nowadays, well, duh. This would be like organizing a pile of books by how many pages they have, and then being surprised that all the thick books end up in the same category as each other, and same goes for the thin ones. Do you know what? There isn't a single book that is 2 inches thick in the pile of books with less than 100 pages. Wow! Must be God. Or maybe that's just how we organized it.
It is these outermost electrons which determine the physical characteristics of the atom. This periodic table did not happen by chance.
No, it happened by us making it happen. Human beings organized a thing does not mean God is real.
Atoms and molecules have their various properties because their electrons are bound by the laws of quantum physics. In other words, chemistry is based on physics. If the laws of quantum physics were just a bit different, atoms might not even be possible.
Sure, but do you have any evidence to suggest that it's even possible for the laws of quantum physics to be different? Is there any evidence to suggest that without some guiding force they would actually have gone in a different direction than they did? This whole argument boils down to things are the way they are, therefore God. It's not convincing.
God designed the laws of physics just right so that the laws of chemistry would come out the way he wanted them to.
It would actually be much more indicative of design if the laws of physics were determined to make the existence of life impossible, and yet life exists anyway. That would be much more impressive and would suggest supernatural intervention to me much more strongly than the mere fact that life happens to exist in an environment in which it is possible for life to exist. Next up, they go into Kepler's laws, and I'm skipping the description. It's ultimately irrelevant to the point. They just want to claim Kepler for themselves, because he's a well-known scientist of history, and he was a creationist. Well, he was also an astrologer, so yeah, he had beliefs that today we would see as unscientific, even by Answers in Genesis standards.
As with the laws of chemistry, these laws of planetary motion are not fundamental. Rather, they are the logical derivation of other laws of nature.
Yes, the laws of planetary motion can be derived from Newton's laws of motion. In other words, the laws of physics are descriptive rather than prescriptive. We can use math to describe them in many different ways. If they were different, the math would also be different.
In fact, it was another creation scientist, Sir Isaac Newton, who discovered that Kepler's laws could be derived mathematically from certain laws of physics, specifically the laws of gravity and motion, which Newton himself formulated.
And that's the end of the laws of planetary motion segment. They didn't even try to draw the connection between the laws of planetary motion and God. This section seems more like them being concerned with name-dropping famous scientists and claiming them as creationists. Like, Kepler was a Lutheran, which today means that he might have been a creationist, but he also might not have been. Given the state of scientific progress, my money is on him having sided with the branch of the Lutheran Church that is more willing to accept science. And Newton was a very unorthodox Christian with his rejection of the Trinity. Newton believed that worshipping Christ as a god is a form of idolatry. Since Answers in Genesis holds to a Trinitarian view that believes that Christ is literally God, they would most definitely be at odds with Newton, not to mention his dabblings in the occult and alchemy. But no, gotta ignore all that, because we hadn't yet figured out how old the Earth was, so technically most scientists back then would have thought the Earth rather young compared to how old we know it is today. Therefore, they can all be claimed as young Earth creationists on a technicality, in a blatant attempt at associating them with creationism as a way of legitimizing a belief system that they definitely would not have held if they were alive today.
The laws of physics. The field of physics describes the behavior of the universe at its most fundamental level.
Ah, so you do know that they are descriptive rather than prescriptive. Well done. Gold star, which I'm sure I'll be revoking momentarily.
The laws of physics are usually mathematical in nature. Some laws of physics can be described with a concise formula, such as E equals mc squared.
Yes, we use math to describe how things work. The math does not make it work that way with things obeying our mathematical laws. Math just describes it. There is no reason to think that the laws of physics actually need something to make them be what they are.
The simple formula F equals ma shows how an object with mass, m, will accelerate a when a net force, F, is applied to it. It is amazing that every object in the universe consistently obeys these rules. There is a hierarchy in physics. Some laws of physics can be derived from other laws of physics. For example, Einstein's famous formula, E equals mc squared, can be derived from the principles and equations of special relativity.
Yes, and principles and equations that can be derived from general relativity, like the Friedmann equations, are some of the ways that we know the universe is about 14 billion years old and started expanding at the Big Bang. So, as long as we're here laying the groundwork for these equations to be valid based on answers in Genesis logic, I figured we'd take that little detour. Sure, plunk God down as the first cause if you like, you're still drastically wrong about the age of the Earth and universe.
Conversely, there are many laws of physics that cannot be derived from other laws of physics. Many of these are suspected to be derivative principles, but scientists have not yet deduced their derivation. And some laws of physics may be truly fundamental, not based on other laws.
Possibly, but that is by no means a universally accepted principle. The truth is that at this stage, we don't really know, but we do have some ideas. In fact, there's one idea floating around there that there really aren't any laws of physics. It's more of a landscape, and sometimes different laws can give you the same results with different mathematical possibilities connecting the various laws.
They only exist because God wills them to.
See, now that's the jump that I just can't make with you. There is no connection here, logical, mathematical, or otherwise, that gets you from there is a fundamental law of physics from which all other laws are derived, to God has to exist in order to force this fundamental law of physics to exist. Especially when we still aren't even sure if there is one singular fundamental law of physics.
In fact, this must be the case for at least one law of physics, and perhaps several.
Nope. Sure, Einstein was of the opinion that there was at least one fundamental law of physics, but Einstein, brilliant as he was not right about everything. For one, he didn't see quantum physics as useful. Asserting that an unknown must be the case because God doesn't actually provide any evidence for God. It is just an assertion.
The most fundamental. Logically, this is because if the most fundamental law were based on some other law, it would not be the most fundamental law.
How do we know they're not codependent, though? One law can be derived from another, but the derivation can go both ways. In a case like that, how do you determine which one is the most fundamental?
Universal constants. Additionally, there are many physical constants of nature. These are parameters within the laws of physics which set the strengths of the fundamental forces, such as gravity, and the masses of the fundamental particles, such as electrons. As with the laws of physics, some constants depend on others, whereas some constants are likely fundamental. God alone has set their value.
Again, any of the constants that are fundamental, we don't know why they are what they are. We don't know if it would even be possible for them to be different. We don't know if previous universe-causing singularities attempted universe with different values for these forces and failed. And what's more, the whole argument with regards to the fundamental forces is that if they weren't what they are, then the Big Bang would have looked very different and star formation would have been impossible, thereby rendering evolution impossible. This aspect of the teleological argument relies on an acceptance of Big Bang cosmology in order to work.
These constants are essential for life. In many cases, if the fundamental constants had a slightly different value, life would not be possible.
Well, the truth is, again, we don't really know. It's possible that it would be possible, but that it would look very different. It's possible that it would not be possible. But again, this doesn't strike me as evidence for God so much as finding life where it would clearly be impossible would. Just imagine if we measured all these constants that the universe relies on in order to operate, and then find that nothing even close to life as we know it could exist under those conditions, and yet there we are existing. Life developed where it is possible for life to develop is just not a convincing argument to me.
For example, if the strength of the electromagnetic coupling constant were slightly altered, molecules could not exist.
Okay, do you have any evidence to suggest that it is even possible for it to be slightly different?
The anthropic principle. The laws of physics, along with their associated constants, are fine-tuned in just the right way so that life, particularly human life, is possible.
Why particularly human life? The majority of the universe would kill a human instantly. The majority of the surface of the planet that humans live on would kill a human by drowning in short order. The majority of the rest of the surface of the planet is also inhospitable to humans. How does any of this add up to the universe was designed specifically to hold human life?
This fact is called the anthropic principle. God created the fundamental laws of physics in just the right way, and gave the constants just the right values so that other constants and derivative laws of physics would come out in just the right way, so that chemistry would work in the right way, so that the elements and compounds would have the right properties so that life would be possible.
Ignoring the fact that there's nothing suggesting that there is even some fundamental law, and that there is nothing that says it is even possible for these constants to be tweaked in other ways, and also keeping in mind that if there is just one fundamental law or constant from which all others are derived, then it lowers the amount of fine-tuning required, thereby rendering the argument weaker, there's nothing that says that these constants could not have already been tried in different ways, or that there could be an infinite number of universes with an infinite number of combinations for these constants. To assert any of these options as though it were a certainty would be quite the display of arrogance.
It's an amazingly complex challenge, one that no mere human being has the intellectual capacity to solve. In fact, there are many, many aspects of this present universe that we still do not completely understand.
Okay, that's nice. Does our capacity to understand things somehow have an impact on how plausible those things are? Why would it matter whether or not we can understand these things? More to the point, would a universe designed specifically for humans not be easy for humans to understand? Unless God just enjoys watching us suffer, which it seems to be the case, why would he make the universe such that for the majority of human history thus far, our lack of understanding has led to much death, disease, and suffering?
The laws of nature, which we have discovered and expressed mathematically, are only imperfect models of reality.
Alright, so then you clearly understand that what we refer to as the laws of nature are just representations of our understanding of how nature works, and as such, if we encounter a situation where one or more of these laws are broken, the most likely scenario is that we have either an imperfect understanding of the law, or an imperfect understanding of the scenario. So I would expect to not find any articles on Answers in Genesis website talking about how thermodynamics proves evolution or the Big Bang wrong, given this understanding. Oh wait, a search for thermodynamics on AIG's website has 186 results. Well, maybe they just like talking about the laws for some reason other than using them to prove well-evidenced theories wrong. Oh, no, they don't. Though, to be fair, the problems with thermodynamics that AIG brings up aren't problems with the scientific understanding of thermodynamics, they are problems with AIG's understanding of thermodynamics. So, like I said, it's an imperfection in the human understanding of the law. I'm skipping the next two segments. It's the laws of mathematics and the laws of logic. The whole sections are rebutted by a single statement. The laws of mathematics and logic are descriptive, not prescriptive, something I've already been harping on here, so I don't really feel the need to get into it much more. But at the end of the day, we don't need a transcendent being to exist to make them work. We have developed them to describe how things work. If things work differently, then they would be different to reflect that different reality. There's just two things that I would like to address in this section.
God cannot lie, Numbers 23:19.
2319! We have a 2319! Red alert!
Numbers 23:19 says, God is not man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should change his mind. That doesn't quite jive with Jeremiah 27, which says, O Lord, you have deceived me, and I was deceived. Or with Genesis 18:22 through 33, in which Abraham gets God to change his mind several times about how many righteous people must be found in Sodom for God to not destroy it. Fuck Gomorrah, though, that place is trash.
No!
I actually had in mind to change the color of the digital highlighter every time God changed his mind in this passage, but I ran out of colors on Bible Gateway before I ran out of mind changes. Oh yeah, and let's not forget that crazy bit in Exodus where Moses is traveling back to Egypt, and out of nowhere, God just suddenly decides to kill him. Until Zipporah cut off her son's foreskin and threw it at Moses' feet, which changed God's mind about killing Moses, which seemed in itself to be a mind change from having Moses go to Egypt to free the Israelites. After all, it says God sought to kill Moses, not that he pretended to seek to kill Moses as a test of some sort, which, even if you want to interpret it that way, that constitutes a deception, so violates the God doesn't lie principle. And I just can't get over how completely random that story is. Like, just out of nowhere, God suddenly decides he's going to murder Moses. And somehow Zipporah had time to circumcise her kid in between God meeting Moses with murderous intent and God actually killing Moses. That must have been the fastest circumcision in history. And of course, there are the verses where God has regrets. He regrets making Saul king, and he regrets making humans. A regret is when you change your mind about a choice that you made in the past, but because it is in the past, you cannot actually change it. So it has the double whammy of God having changed his mind and being constrained by time.
Or be tempted with evil, James 1:13.
So, was Jesus tempted in the desert or not? If God cannot be tempted, then the temptation of Christ is meaningless if he is actually God. That story fits better with the idea that Jesus was not God, but was God's adopted son, and the temptation that began his ministry was the test to see if he was worthy of being God's son on earth. And since his temptation only shows up in the Synoptics, with John possibly referencing it when Jesus says that the prince of this world has no claim over him, but no more than that, that actually kind of tracks with the idea that Synoptic Jesus was a man who God chose to adopt as his son, while John's Jesus was actually God in the flesh. John's Jesus never shows weakness, so John omitted the temptation story as being tempted is something that cannot happen to God, so it's a pointless story. Of course God isn't tempted by an offer to rule the earth. God is God. God will rule the earth after he does the apocalypse thing that wipes out this one. So why would that be a tempting offer? And Satan knows that, so why would he even bother trying? Okay, now on to the uniformity of nature part. I'm going to let the whole paragraph play before responding because there's really only one point being made in the entire paragraph.
The uniformity of nature. The laws of nature are uniform. They do not change arbitrarily, and they apply throughout the whole cosmos. The laws of nature apply in the future just as they have applied in the past. This is one of the most basic assumptions in all of science. Without this assumption, science would be impossible. If the laws of nature suddenly and arbitrarily changed tomorrow, then past experimental results would tell us nothing about the future. Why is it that we can depend on the laws of nature to apply consistently throughout time? The secular scientist cannot justify this important assumption, but the Christian can. The Bible gives us the answer. God is Lord over all creation and sustains the universe in a consistent and logical way. God does not change, and so he upholds the universe in a consistent, uniform way throughout time.
So, the laws of nature do not change. Without God, this apparently doesn't make sense. Except it does. I see no reason to assume that the laws of nature would change without some force making them not change. But then they appeal to God sustaining the universe in a consistent and logical way. God doesn't change, so he sustains the universe in a consistent, uniform way throughout time. Except when he doesn't. Because if God actually did that, then that would be an admission that miracles are impossible. They've tied the uniformity of nature to God's nature. So if God changes how the laws of nature work in order to perform a miracle, then that means that his nature must also change. Unless you want to unhook the laws of nature from God's nature, in which case you don't need a God to uphold them. That's it for this one. I really intended to cover 2 chapters of the book, but it's getting long, so I guess I'll just take it 1 chapter at a time. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Rangerman9404, who says, if a man looking at a woman with lust in his eyes means he already committed adultery in his heart, shouldn't he just go through with the physical act he's already guilty of in his heart? He's going to hell either way, so why not? In for a penny, in for a pound, am I right? Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, Lynn Dobbs, Mark McManus, What Jesus, and all the rest, who are the laws of nature that operate in just such a way as to allow my channel to exist. If you'd like to be grossly misunderstood by Creationists, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino. If you feel so inclined, you can also support the channel through direct donation over my Amazon wishlist, which are linked in the description. If you'd like to listen to my videos in podcast form, the link for that is also in the description, as well as links to my social media accounts and my P.O. Box address. See you next time!